Trump fights back. It's part of why we like him, right? Well, he's fighting back by suing George Stephanopoulos for defamation for what he said about him the other day in that interview with Nancy Mace. We're going to unpack that whole thing for you. Plus, speaking of courtrooms, in the Supreme Court yesterday, the First Amendment was on trial. And I know you'd like to think that your Supreme Court justices have a good working knowledge of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but the Justice Joe Biden just put on the bench, she's got to watch more Schoolhouse Rock. We'll share that with you. And also, Trump under fire again. It's a firestorm. He said something that makes everybody angry. It's a bloodbath. Well, is he right about Democrats? Excuse me. Is he right about Jewish Democrats voting for the party that is marching in the streets calling for the evisceration of the Jewish state? Is it wrong what he said about Jewish Democrats? We'll say, yeah, he was absolutely right about what he said. And we're going to break it down for you in just a minute. We're brought to you today by the Electronic Payments Coalition. My name is Larry O'Connor. You're watching Larry. Not good for my brain to freeze right there at that moment, right? I mean, we got an hour ahead of us here. Of course, he was right about Jewish Democrats voting for Democrats. What's going on there? We're gonna unpack everything for you. Of course, what the media is telling you about Donald Trump's statement is not the whole truth. We're gonna play the whole clip for you and get to all of it coming up in just a bit. Stick with us as we are live right now on Rumble, as we are every day at noon. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for commenting and sharing this with friends, and also liking and subscribing and hitting notifications, whatever platform you're watching us on right now, including all of the Town Hall Media websites, townhall.com, hotair.com, pjmedia.com, redstate.com, bearingarms.com, twitchy.com. Do we have to still keep adding the .com? Everybody knows the .com at this point, right? I thought so. Donald Trump announced today that he is suing George Stephanopoulos and hopefully by extension ABC News. This comes from the interview that we broke down for you last week between he and Congresswoman Nancy Mace from South Carolina. You remember this. Nancy Mace publicly acknowledged the fact years ago that she had been the victim of rape when she was a teenager. And George Stephanopoulos then said, well, how can you possibly support Donald Trump? But he couldn't leave it at that. He actually made a false and possibly defamatory statement. Watch.
I still get judged for it today.
I'm asking you a very simple question.
And I answered it. You're shaming me for my political choices.
I'm asking you a question about why you endorse someone who's been found liable for rape.
It was not a criminal court. This was a civil court. It was a civil court. And by the way,
okay. So there are two things there, and Nancy Mace makes a very important point there. It's a civil court, not a criminal court. It's got a different standard of guilt and et cetera, et cetera. But did you hear what George Stephanopoulos said there? A jury found him liable for rape.
You're shaming me for my political choices.
I'm asking you a question about why you endorse someone who's been found liable for rape.
It was not a criminal court. This was a civil court. It was a civil court. And by the way,
it was a civil court that found him liable for rape. Liable for rape. Here's the problem. A court did not find him liable for rape. A jury did not find him liable for rape. In fact, I know this for a fact that he did not find him liable for rape because I learned it from ABC News, the same network that George Stephanopoulos is on. This is how they reported the story when it first broke.
Aaron, the jury found Trump liable for sexual abuse, but not for rape. What was the deciding factor there?
Okay, so what happened here? What changed between when ABC News reported the story, where the anchor specifically says the jury found him liable for sexual abuse and not for rape? You see, the jury had that choice. They had that option as they were weighing this. And by the way, we should also point out that Donald Trump and his team, they are appealing this decision and deny, of course, that they were guilty of what this jury found them guilty of, or liable of, actually, is the more specific term that we should use since it's a civil case. But there's ABC News reporting it very specifically. Jury found him guilty of sexual abuse or liable for sexual abuse, not for rape. So where's the disconnect? That's George Stephanopoulos' own network, right? And that's the crux of this lawsuit, because according to the lawsuit, Quote, judges and 2 separate juries have found him liable for rape. That's what George Stephanopoulos said. And for defaming the victim of that rape. How do you square your endorsement of Donald Trump with the testimony we just saw? Here's what the lawsuit says against George Stephanopoulos. These statements were and remain false and were made by defendant Stephanopoulos with actual malice or with a reckless disregard for the truth, given that defendant Stephanopoulos knows that these statements are patently and demonstrably false. And the fact that his own network, where he has a leadership position, and I believe he actually has a editorial title, he's either news director or executive editor or something like that, his own network where he has a role in the decision-making process for editorial decisions, his own network reported the story at the time this way. I'll let it play out this time.
Aaron, the jury found Trump liable for sexual abuse, but not for rape. What was the deciding factor there?
They had 3 options when they were considering whether to hold Trump liable for battery. They could find that he raped her, as Carol had claimed, and they didn't do that. But they did find a lesser degree of battery, that E. Jean Carroll was telling the truth when she said that Trump sexually abused her. And her testimony about the actual act of rape was a little more vague than other aspects of her story. So they find this one lesser degree of battery, still hold him liable, and award damages as a result of that.
So it seems pretty clear. And that's their legal analyst right there, Aaron Katarski, who was brought in specifically and is on the payroll, the same payroll that George Stephanopoulos is on, to explain the difference. Does George not watch his own network? He actually has an office right down the hall from this studio where this is taking place right now. In fact, that could be the same studio that he does Good Morning America in. So that's very important because of the language of defamation law in this country. Again, actual malice, which I think you could make the case for too, because he has a vested interest in attacking Donald Trump, considering he's been on the payroll of the Clintons and Democrats and has carried water for the party his entire career as an actual political activist, not a journalist. But even if you can't prove his actual malice, you can certainly prove reckless disregard for the truth, because it is reckless to not actually try to seek out the truth, to seek out the facts when you're in a position of power, when you have that kind of high public profile and you are reporting a story or conducting a high profile interview with a congresswoman. If you make an allegation and a statement and repeat the allegation as a statement, as he did multiple times in this interview, if the facts are easily attainable, you have an obligation and a responsibility to have those facts at your disposal. Otherwise, you are demonstrating what? A reckless disregard for the truth. So let's watch George Stephanopoulos. Now that you've seen how ABC News reported the story and specifically went out of their way to say that the jury found Donald Trump liable for sexual abuse, but not for rape. In fact, they declined. They had the option. The judge gave them that choice in the instructions to the jury, and the jury said, nope, we don't see rape here, but we do see sexual abuse. So given that's how ABC News reported it, let's watch George Stephanopoulos in his reckless disregard for the truth.
I still get judged for it today.
I'm asking you a very simple question.
And I answered it. You're shaming me for my political choices.
I'm asking you a question about why you endorse someone who's been found liable for rape.
It was not a criminal court. This was a civil court. It was a civil court. And by the way, she joked about the judgment and what she was going to do with all that money. And I find that offensive.
I'm asking you about
as a rape victim who's been shamed for years now because of her rape, you're trying to shame me again by asking me this political question.
You've repeated that again.
I think it's offensive. As a woman, I find it offensive. My political choices, I've endorsed the man that I believe is best for our country. It's not Joe Biden. And you looked at the dueling rallies yesterday in Georgia. Laken Riley's family was with Donald Trump. They weren't with Joe Biden. The same guy yesterday that apologized for calling her killer an illegal, who wasn't illegal. And here you are trying to shame a rape victim. I find it disgusting.
I mean, you keep saying I'm shaming you.
You are. The question, it is.
How is the question asking you about a presidential candidate who's
You're asking a rape victim.
And there's no question about that. And you've courageously talked about that.
Because I've been raped. I think that's disgusting.
No, I'm questioning your political choices because you're supporting
me. You're
someone who's been found liable for rape. Actually, I'm not trying to.
You are. That's exactly.
You're not answering the question.
I think it's disgusting.
Well, you're welcome to say that, but you have to answer the question. Why are you supporting someone who's been found liable for rape?
I just answered your question.
What is the answer?
He was not found guilty in a criminal court of law. It was sexual abuse. It wasn't actually rape, by the way. And E. Jean Carroll joked about all the money she's going to get and made a mockery out of this case. And I think that's offensive. There's a reason why women don't come forward. And when you have someone who says that they're raped and they make a mockery out of this civil court judgment, it's offensive to other women. It makes it harder for other women to come forward when another woman has made a mockery of it.
You said women don't come forward because they are afraid. They are afraid
they're
because
judged
they're defamed
and shamed,
by those
like you're trying to shame me this morning.
They are afraid to come forward, as you said, because they are defamed by those who commit the rape. That's what Donald Trump has been found guilty of doing.
He defended himself over that and denies that it ever happened, but he was not found guilty in a criminal court of law.
Yeah. And so there's George Stephanopoulos once again mansplaining to Nancy Mace, a rape victim, how a good little rape victim is supposed to behave, what they're supposed to think, how they're supposed to vote, who they're supposed to support, and also mansplaining to her exactly what keeps women from coming forward. Oh, no. I'm sorry. Your opinion is wrong, Nancy Mace. The reason that women don't come forward is because Donald Trump tweets something mean to them. That's the problem here, where Nancy Mace is like, no. It's because of men like you who say that we have to think, feel, speak, vote, behave a certain way. Of course he was publicly shaming her. He was probably, how dare you? You should be ashamed of yourself for supporting this man. That's the entire thesis behind this. And it was all based on a lie. In real time, she called him out and said, no, actually, he wasn't found liable by that jury for rape. He was found liable for sexual abuse. So God bless Donald Trump for pushing back, for defending himself, and for the most part, in the long run, defending you and your right to vote for whoever you want. He's suing George Stephanopoulos. It's going to be so one of two things is going to happen here. George Stephanopoulos is going to say, screw you. I'll see you in court. I'll fight this, right? Or the powers that be, ABC News, are going to say, George, we got a couple problems here, buddy. First of all, you're not really looking good right now by sitting there with your smarmy, sanctimonious, pugnacious little face telling a sitting congresswoman who is also a rape victim exactly how she's supposed to behave. Honestly, if you weren't a powerful liberal Democrat, we would have fired you by now. I assure you, anyone who isn't George Stephanopoulos would have no career left after this. But also, George, we got a bigger problem. You lied. You lied. And you need to clean up this problem. You see, Donald Trump's lawsuit goes away if ABC News and George Stephanopoulos come forward, publicly apologize, retract what they said, and correct the record. That's how these things work. Courts have been very, very, very understanding for major journalistic endeavors to do whatever they can to fix whatever defamation may be out there to avoid a lawsuit. And I bet that they'll have this pathway. And the court will say, listen, he got it wrong. He's corrected the record. He's apologized. There's no more lawsuit, which would be beautiful to see him do that. The question is, how's this going to go? Is this going to be, I'll see you in court and we let this play out? Or is this going to be George Stephanopoulos with his tail between his legs, neutered before the American people, apologizing and saying, please forgive me, Donald Trump? Either way, I'm popping my popcorn. There's something about George Stephanopoulos that actually inspires Donald Trump to push back in a pretty serious way. This is an old clip from after the 2020 election that has resurfaced that reminds everybody that George Stephanopoulos hates Donald Trump. Why Donald Trump continues to give him exclusive interviews, you and I will never know. But in this interview, Donald Trump gave him a little jab.
And going back to last June, is there anything you regret?
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to have done certain things over, but you can't. You can't. But that's true in life. I'd love to have done in life certain things over, I guess. And you would have too.
Give me one.
You would have loved not to have contributed to the Clinton Foundation, as an example. There are things that you wish you didn't do, okay? You came very close to the edge. You would have loved to have had that decision over again.
Oh, sure. There's plenty of things I would rather do over again. Really? Give me one. Oh, well, I'll tell something that you probably wish you could have done over again. You see, George Stephanopoulos is no longer eligible to be a moderator for Republican debates. Frankly, he was ineligible before, but for some reason, the Republican National Committee still allowed him to be a moderator for the debates. But when Trump was the candidate in 2016. He said, why the hell do we have George Stephanopoulos moderating the Republican debate? The guy is a donor to the Clinton campaign, a donor to the Clinton Foundation, a donor to the Clinton Global Initiative. He's participated in events for the Clinton Foundation. And oh, by the way, he used to run cover for Bill Clinton, the Clinton administration, and all the, remember, bimbo eruptions, which is how George Stephanopoulos used to refer to victims of sexual abuse back when he worked for Bill Clinton. But now he's America's morning man. So Donald Trump said, why is he moderating our debates? And the Republican National Committee finally said, yeah, how come he is moderating our debates? And ABC News agreed and said, yeah, okay, as long as he's a donor to the Clinton Foundation, he can't moderate Republican debates. And that was Trump pushing back pretty good on that. In all of this, Nancy Mace comes out looking very good, very strong, and a formidable politician, which is interesting because some reports from a couple of weeks ago said that Nancy Mace is actually on Donald Trump's short list to be the running mate. I don't see Nancy Mace being the one who gets the call, but it is interesting that she's one of the ones included. That short list, by the way, apparently, according to Bloomberg News, just got a little bit shorter. Their report today says that Trump has now officially ruled out Vivek Ramaswamy as his running mate. Unfortunate. I like Vivek Ramaswamy, although I don't necessarily know if he would have been the best person as running mate since he's just barely 35. And I know constitutionally, if you're 35, you can be president, but I don't think the American people are necessarily ready for someone to be that close to the presidency at such a young age. I'm an ageist, I'll admit it, but I think that's part of the problem here. But if you read on in the article, you'll see that right here, Trump personally told Ramaswamy he won't be his vice presidential pick, according to people briefed on the discussion, but is considering him for posts, including Homeland Security Secretary. Some Trump allies see Ramaswamy as ideal for the job because they say he excels at public speaking and, as an Indian American, son of an immigrant, could neutralize criticism of sweeping immigration restrictions. We don't need sweeping immigration restrictions, by the way. We need to secure the border, keep people from coming in illegally, and deport everybody who is here illegally out of the country. After that, immigration process is fine. It can continue, maybe streamline it a little bit. Furthermore, this article does suggest that those who have impressed Trump and his team for possible cabinet roles include another former GOP primary vote, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, as well as Representative Elise Stefanik and former U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. Also, apparently, ousted U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is now seen as a top candidate to serve as chief of staff. McCarthy, who turned down the job in Trump's last term because he wanted to serve as Speaker, has assets that Trump views positively, including an understanding of Capitol Hill, federal agencies, and budgets. So that's Bloomberg reporting today that as of now, Vivek Ramaswamy is no longer being considered. So the shortlist is getting shorter, and many observers are hoping Donald Trump makes that announcement sooner rather than later to inject a little bit more life into the campaign. Because let's face it, a lot of people are, well, they're not incredibly enthused by having this election be a repeat of the last election, which it won't be. You see, the last election was Biden-Harris versus Trump-Pence. And we know for sure that Mike Pence will not be the running mate for Donald Trump this year. So it won't be an exact repeat. That last name is going to be a difference maker, not only because it will inject a new flavor into the campaign, it will inject new life and new vigor into a campaign that right now most people are looking at is just a repeat of 4 years ago, but also, and I want to just say this as many times as I can before he makes this decision, this may be the most consequential running mate choice you and I have seen in our lifetimes, because for the first time in over 100 years, a man is running for president who cannot run again. and he's choosing a new running mate. Now, Ronald Reagan, obviously, when he ran for his second term, he already had his running mate, right? And it was George Herbert Walker Bush. And what happened to him? He became the next president. And when Bill Clinton ran for his second term, he had Al Gore. And what happened? Well, he was the nominee for the Democrats, right? This is what happens. When you know going in for your second term and your final term that you're picking the person who will be your running mate, you're also picking the immediate front runner for the Republican nomination in 2028. This is a huge choice. And now we know that person won't be Vivek Ramaswamy. We'll see who Donald Trump picks. Quick word now from our friends at Electronic Payments Coalition. I bet you like your rewards that you get on your credit card, right? I know I do. Well, they're in danger right now. Millions of Americans who earn and use credit card rewards might have them ripped away from them because of corporate megastores. They want to take those rewards away. Rewards that we use on groceries and school supplies, cash back to save on gas, grow our small businesses, travel miles we use to make memories. It's called the Durbin-Marshall Credit Card Bill. It's being debated right now in the Senate, and it will eliminate credit card rewards. No more travel miles, no more cash back. When lawmakers help corporate megastores line their pockets, American families are the ones who have to pay for it. And you know that's wrong. So tell your senator right now to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. Go to handsoffmyrewards.com, handsoffmyrewards.com. They'll give you all the information you need and the tools to directly connect with your lawmaker, your senator. Take action today. It's handsoffmyrewards.com. All right, speaking of the First Amendment and defamation law, and what the Supreme Court has done in the past to give leeway to publications and to journalists and to everyday Americans to be able to have that cherished First Amendment right, freedom of speech and freedom of press. Yesterday, our freedom of speech had a day in court on the Supreme Court. This is the lawsuit brought by the Attorney General of Missouri and a couple of other states against the Biden administration because the administration was working with social media companies, coercing social media companies, pressuring social media companies, and threatening social media companies to censor, delete, silence, and even ban everyday Americans from expressing our opinions on those platforms. Most specifically, where it came to COVID pandemic policies, whether it was lockdown or masks or critically, the vaccine. If you were expressing an opinion that the Biden administration thought was dangerous, then they picked up the phone, they called Facebook, they called Twitter, and they said, delete that, censor it. It would be a shame if something happened to your company, if the federal government started investigating you, if you allow this kind of speech to continue. That's exactly what's already been found as this case has made its way through the courts all the way up to the Supreme Court. And yesterday was the argument specifically about whether the executive branch of the federal government can exert that kind of unilateral pressure. Let's listen to some of the discussion because it's incredibly enlightening. And frankly, this first clip is terrifying. Ketanji Brown Jackson, the woman put on the Supreme Court by Joe Biden, the woman who couldn't even during her confirmation hearings answer the question, what is a woman? She said, I'm not a biologist. She had one of the most frightening questions I've ever heard from a Supreme Court justice when discussing matters of the First Amendment, or for that matter, any part of the Constitution, specifically the Bill of Rights, laid out to restrict the government's infringement on us and our God-given rights. Listen.
Justice Jackson?
So my biggest concern is that your view has the First Amendment hamstringing the government in significant ways in the most important time periods. I mean, what would you have the government do? I've heard you say a couple times that the government can post its own speech, but in my hypothetical, kids, this is not safe, don't do it, is not going to get it done. And so I guess some might say that the government actually has a duty to take steps to protect the citizens of this country. And you seem to be suggesting that that duty cannot manifest itself in the government encouraging or even pressuring platforms to take down harmful information. So can you help me? Because I'm really worried about that, because you've got the First Amendment operating in an environment of threatening circumstances from the government's perspective, and you're saying that the government can't interact with the source of those problems.
And Your Honor, I understand that instinct. And
Yeah, so the dumb is so intense here that it actually hurts my brain. To say that her biggest concern about all of this is that the First Amendment is hampering and hamstringing the government from regulating what can be said based on what the government believes is harmful or not. That's literally what the First Amendment is all about. It's literally what the Bill of Rights is all about. I mean, literally. Coming out of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, the only way the states would ratify the Constitution is if it was ratified in tandem with those 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, that said, okay, this is the structure of our government. This is how it's going to operate. And oh, by the way, these 10 items listed specifically say what the government cannot do to infringe upon your rights that you were born with. Whether it's the right to bear arms in self-defense, or the right to a fair trial, or a speedy trial, or a trial of your jurors, or the right against self-incrimination, and certainly the First Amendment, the right of the freedom of speech, that they cannot infringe upon. And her worry is that the government is hamstrung by the First Amendment. Of course the government's hamstrung by the First Amendment. That's the whole damn point. We're going to go back to this little clip and break it down a little further in a bit. But I want you to hear some of the smarter discussions that took place here with Samuel Alito and some of the other justices here. Sit back, listen up.
Exchange between the White House and other federal officials and Facebook in particular, but also some of the other platforms. And I see that the White House and federal officials are repeatedly saying that Facebook and the federal government should be partners. We're on the same team. Officials are demanding answers. I want an answer. I want it right away. When they're unhappy, they curse them out. There are regular meetings. There is constant pestering of Facebook and some of the other platforms, and they want to have regular meetings. And they suggest, they suggest rules that should be applied, and why don't you tell us everything that you're going to do so we can help you and we can look it over. And I thought, wow, I cannot imagine federal officials taking that approach to the print media, our representatives over there. If you did that to them, what do you think the reaction would be? And so I thought, the only reason why this is taking place is because the federal government has got Section 230 and antitrust in its pocket, and it's to mix my metaphors, and it's got these big clubs available to it, and so it's treating Facebook and these other platforms like they're subordinates. Would you do that to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Associated Press or any other big newspaper or wire service?
Yeah, that's honestly the crux of the whole matter. Right there from the very wise and very smart Samuel Alito. This is, again, and let me just be clear here. This is the White House and the FBI in constant contact with these social media. Imagine if they were in constant contact on a daily basis with ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox News, Town Hall Media, New York Times, Washington Post, coordinating with them. Making sure that they were getting the story straight, that no one on their websites or on their networks were publishing or broadcasting anything that was contrary to what the White House and the FBI thought was reasonable and appropriate or harmful. It would never happen. Why? Because of the First Amendment. What made the Biden administration think they could do this? This Section 230 and the potential for antitrust laws. That's what they used, as Justice Alito put it, as a big club. They held it behind their back. Facebook and Instagram, you guys are just too big. we could bring a antitrust lawsuit against you if you don't play ball with us. That's literally what happened here. And if you're watching any cable news or broadcast news network, or if you're seeing any editorial printed on any website where they're celebrating what the Biden administration did here, and they're saying, wow, they acted appropriately, this is absolutely right, just, call them up if you could and just say, okay, are you going to volunteer for this kind of thing? You guys go first. What makes you different? NewYorkTimes.com or ABCNews.com or CNN.com. What makes you different than Facebook.com? Are you ready for everything that you put out there to be policed and judged and gatekept by whoever happens to be in the White House right now? And by the way, that's the other part of this. The reason that liberals and the left are absolutely open to this idea of this kind of intrusion by the White House, and this was the White House doing this, is because they're guys in the White House, so it'll never affect them. But are they okay if it's a Republican White House picking up the phone and telling them what they can and can't publish? Well, of course not. And neither would I be, by the way. That's the whole point of having principles and values and standards and laws, that they apply either way. But these authoritarians on the left right now, they're perfectly fine with this stuff as long as it's conservative voices being silenced or those that they don't agree with. A little bit more.
But whether or not the government can do this is something I took up with Mr. Fletcher, depends on the application of our First Amendment jurisprudence. And there may be circumstances in which the government could prohibit certain speech on the internet or otherwise. I mean, do you disagree that we would have to apply strict scrutiny and determine whether or not there is a compelling interest and how the government has tailored its regulation?
Certainly, Your Honor. I think at the end of every First Amendment analysis, you'll have the strict scrutiny framework in which, in some national security hypos, for example, the government may well be able to demonstrate a compelling interest, may well be able to demonstrate.
All right. So not every situation in which the government engages in conduct that ultimately has some effect on on speech necessarily becomes a First Amendment violation, correct?
Maybe not necessarily, Your Honor. I guess the top line question I would ask is, has the government set out to abridge the freedom of speech? And in this case, you see that time and time again, because if you control
That's not the test for First Amendment violations.
Your Honor, this flows from the plain text of the First Amendment, right?
No, I understand, but we have a test for a determination of whether or not the First Amendment is actually violated. So in certain situations, the government can actually require that speech be suppressed if there's a compelling interest, right?
It can, Your Honor. And I guess what I would say is that the courts below never got to strict scrutiny because the government never raised this. This has never been litigated. The question in this case is whether at the front end, the government itself has undertaken
action. Is the coercion, is the state action, right? That's the question in this case.
And I would urge the court to address the state action issue just like you addressed it in Bantam Books. Use that term 4 times in Bantam Books.
And could I just understand, because it seems like...
Let me just break that down. That was Ketanji Brown Jackson again. And when they're talking about strict scrutiny and some basic limitations on First Amendment that under extraordinary circumstances the government can exercise. This is the kind of thing, this is like when Geraldo Rivera is reporting live from a war zone and he actually broadcasts live that the troops are right here in this location, right? Putting troops in harm's way and infringing on the military in a war action. Or if you're revealing national secrets that actually put people in harm's way and threaten the national security of our country. But even then, that was claimed with the Pentagon Papers, right? That's been claimed a lot of times that, this is against national security. You can't release that. It's going to violate national security interests. And even then, courts are very, very hesitant to side with the government on stuff like that. But in this case, the more important aspect is not that the government has worked to try to silence somebody who's about to reveal something that could put our troops in danger. No, this is a complete and total coercion job that paints with a very broad brush over hundreds, if not thousands of people saying certain things on the internet about the vaccine. And by the way, this is the other part that's incredibly important for everyone to remember. Everything they were trying to silence that they told us was disinformation, Like, for instance, the vaccine isn't going to actually give you immunity. That wasn't disinformation. They knew at the time that that was true. They just didn't like it being out there. They've now admitted that that was the case. But at the time, they claimed it was disinformation because it was contrary to the message they were sending. In other words, your facts are opposed to our propaganda, but since we're the government, our propaganda wins. And that's everything the First Amendment was written to prohibit. The fact that this is even a debate in the Supreme Court is a little scary. A little bit more of the arguments, and then we'll sort of wrap this up with the reality of what we're facing here in terms of the attempts to censor the social media platform that you're watching this on right now.
Fletcher, whether or not that ultimately becomes a First Amendment violation, I mean, I appreciate the coercion point, and that's sort of the government's first point with respect to the merits of this. But I'm interested in your view that the context doesn't, quote, change the First Amendment principles. I mean, I understood our First Amendment jurisprudence to require heightened scrutiny of government restrictions of speech, but not necessarily a total prohibition when you're talking about a compelling interest of the government to ensure, for example, that the public has accurate information in the context of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. So I'm just interested in the government sort of conceding that if there was coercion, then we automatically have a First Amendment violation.
So I'm not conceding that that would be the case. I could imagine that in times of pandemic, if there were actual restrictions, maybe those would be justified. But our position here, because we think it's the position consistent with the facts, is that there wasn't any coercion to begin with.
Mr. Fletcher.
Well, and of course there was coercion, and we'll get to that in a moment, but you hear what the justice is trying to maintain here. Listen, under a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, by the way, can we have your word for that? Is it once in a lifetime? Was that it? Not another one? Because I don't know, I got a weird sense. Don't you? Spidey sense tingling a little bit. They keep saying once in a lifetime, which tells me there's probably going to be 3 or 4 more in our lifetime. But the basis of the argument is, well, there's a once in a lifetime pandemic and the government needs to make sure that accurate information is getting out there. That's not the point. Nothing is stopping the government from putting accurate information out there. What they're trying to do is silence any other information that they don't like, and use their proxies at the social media companies to censor and delete that information. That's what they're doing. This isn't about them making sure that accurate information is out there. I'll tell you what, if the government acted in a noble and believable and truthful way over the course of the last 50 or 60 years, if they didn't have a track record of lying to the citizens at every turn, then we'd probably believe the accurate information they give us. But what accurate information did they deliver during the once-in-a-lifetime pandemic that ended up being true? That's the crux of the problem. And this guy, the Solicitor General on behalf of the Biden administration, his only remedy here is not to fix the problem of the fact that the American government is no longer believable and trustworthy. No. The solution is we need to have the power to silence everybody else. And that should terrify you. Now, I just said that obviously there was coercion here. And if you look at the emails that were written back and forth as part of this lawsuit in the first place, or from the Twitter files that Elon Musk released to the journalists that covered it, you can see that there's palpable coercion from the federal government, from the White House, from the FBI. But don't take your own eyes' word for it. Don't take those emails and what the government says word for it. No, how about we ask this guy? Because he was on the receiving end of it. And when all was said and done, and the Twitter files were released, and everybody saw how the government was operating and pressuring Twitter, suddenly this guy raises his hand and say, "Oh yeah, they were definitely there's a question here whether there was coercion." Listen to Mark Zuckerberg.
So misinformation, I think, has been a really tricky one, because there are things that are kind of obviously false, right? That are maybe factual, but may not be harmful. So it's like, all right, are you gonna censor someone for just being wrong. It's, if there's no kind of harm implication of what they're doing, I think there's a bunch of real kind of issues and challenges there. But then I think that there are other places where it is, just take some of the stuff around COVID earlier on in the pandemic, where there were, real health implications, but there hadn't been time to fully vet a bunch of the scientific assumptions. And, unfortunately, I think a lot of the kind of establishment on that, kind of waffled on a bunch of facts and, asked for a bunch of things to be censored that in retrospect ended up being, more debatable or true. And that stuff is really tough, right? And really undermines trust in that. And
yeah, I'll say it does. Now, he's lamenting that it undermines trust in Facebook and Instagram. I would lament that it undermines trust in, our government that we own. It's ours, we the people, we're supposed to at least. But he said right there that there were things during the pandemic that the government demanded that be censored. And he did. He censored it. Why? Because he was coerced to do it. That's his testimony. Why wouldn't you believe that? And I promised you I'd go back to this one clip of Ketanji Brown Jackson, because let's just stay split screen on this, because I want to break down portions of it that should really send a chill up your spine, based on her understanding of the First Amendment and the role of the government in our lives.
Justice Jackson?
So my biggest concern is that your view has the First Amendment hamstringing the government in significant ways in the most important time periods. Now,
let me pause there for a quick second. Her biggest concern is the First Amendment is hamstringing the government in important time periods. She's talking about like a pandemic, national emergency, national security. That's a good thing. Every single decision made in our government during times of emergency should always be shot through the prism of, does this violate people's rights? That should be first and foremost in their decision-making process. And something tells me during the pandemic, it wasn't. Because I saw Gavin Newsom and Andrew Cuomo and how they conducted themselves, especially compared to Governor DeSantis in Florida, who did seem to have people's individual rights in question every single time. But let's keep going.
What would you have the government do? I've heard you say a couple times that the government can post its own speech, but in my hypothetical, kids, this is not safe, don't do it, is not going to get it done.
Yeah, so the attorney representing Louisiana, I think it was the Attorney General of Louisiana in this case, making the arguments, said, listen, nothing's stopping the government from putting out their own messages. They just shouldn't be silencing other voices. And here's Ketanji Brown Jackson saying, kids, don't do that. It isn't safe, doesn't get the job done. Kids? Her analogy here is it's like a parent or a teacher talking to children. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of our role as the citizens in this government. They work for us. And her view is, yeah, when the government is trying to give out good, positive safety information to the citizenry, it's just like a parent trying to admonish their child. Is the chill up your spine yet? Just wait.
And so I guess some might say that the government actually has a duty to take steps to protect the citizens of this country. And you seem to be suggesting that that duty cannot.
I want to pause there for a second, because I hear this a lot. I even hear this from well-meaning but misguided Republicans, that our first and foremost duty is to protect the American people. I heard that. I remember George W. Bush said that during the war on terror, and it makes us feel good, right? Yeah, we're going to be in harm's way. Terrorists are coming to kill us, and it's the job of every single elected official. First and foremost, the number one job is to protect the lives and safety of the American people. And I know that seems like it makes sense, and it sounds good, doesn't it? But it's funny. It's really funny. That's not in their oath of office. You notice that? They never actually swear on the oath of office to protect and defend the safety and lives of the American people. No, they swear to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Isn't that remarkable that we just take this as a given? that we expect our government to constantly be protecting us. It's their number one job. It's the number one most important thing. And listen, I get it. If I were president of the United States and I knew that there was some imminent threat from a foreign power or from terrorists and innocent people were going to be slaughtered, that would weigh on me. That would be hard. That's part of the territory when you want to be president of the United States. I would go to bed every night and wake up every morning worrying about lives that I could protect, that I could do things to help. But guess what? The most important responsibility is protecting our rights. The most important responsibility is protecting our form of government, our Constitution. That's why that's the oath of office. Not to protect the safety and lives of the American public. Because guess what? The chairman of China and Kim Jong-un and the mullahs over in Iran, they all go to bed beautifully every night, knowing that they're doing everything they can to protect the lives of the people in their countries. Because in a totalitarian, authoritarian state where you have no rights and your rights don't need to be protected, then the politicians can rest easy saying, oh, sure, they don't have freedom, they don't have liberty, they don't have rights, but at least they're safe and alive. And I'm a good person, because I rule with an iron fist and I keep them protected, because these children, they'd be dead without me. They need me. They need the strong hand to protect them. That is the difference between our form of government and other forms of government. And the fact that this justice doesn't get it, whose sole job it is to protect the Constitution. Again, chill up your spine. But there's one more part of this that I want to break down.
And you seem to be suggesting that that duty cannot manifest itself in the government encouraging or even pressuring platforms to take down harmful information.
Yeah. This is the most important part. You seem to suggest that the role of government to protect its citizens doesn't manifest in them pressuring, even coercing a social media platform to take down harmful information. What's the most important critical word in that entire passage? Harmful. Who decides what's harmful? In Ketanji Brown Jackson's world, in the political left's world, in Joe Biden's world and his administration, and sadly, the deep state and the FBI, in their world, they're the ones who get to decide what's harmful. And in this specific case of the pandemic, it was differing opinions on the validity and effectiveness of the vaccine, the legality of vaccine mandates, the effectiveness of social distancing and masks and shutting down our economy. If you differed with what Joe Biden said was the official truth of the matter, well, then you were expressing harmful information. I would ask Justice Brown Jackson a question. If I were smart enough to be a lawyer arguing a case at the Supreme Court, I would say, well, let me answer your question with a question, Madam Justice. If the government decided through the White House, and again, I just want to reiterate, this is the White House and the FBI who did all this communication. If they were promoting the idea that there are only two sexes and there are no genders at all, just sexes, and the notion that a child can change their sex and call it their gender identity, and that they can identify themselves as another gender. If the government decided that that kind of language and that kind of idea was harmful to the government and to children, if they decided that anything posted on social media that encouraged children or young adults or anyone for that matter to change their gender identity and dress and talk and demand to be called the opposite sex, and even desired to use pharmaceuticals or surgical procedures to physically alter themselves to be the opposite sex. If the government decided that was harmful and any communications or videos or postings on social media must be deleted that encourages that kind of behavior, would you see that as problematic? Would you see that as a proper role for the government? Because if the government decides that that's harmful and they decide to pressure social media and pressure TikTok and pressure Instagram to remove everything that might be seen as encouraging young people to change their sexual identity, if the government did that, something tells me Ketanji Brown Jackson would raise her hand and object to it. And that, my friends, is the entire point. What you find harmful may be something different than I find harmful, and might be different than what Joe Biden finds harmful, or Donald Trump finds harmful, or Ketanji Brown Jackson finds harmful. That's the point. We do not want to cede control and power of our ideas and our thoughts and our speech to somebody else to determine what's good or bad for us. Screw you. We get to decide what's good or bad for us. And that's what this whole argument is all about. And the fact that this woman seems to not get it, like I said, chill up the spine. She's not the only one who doesn't get it, by the way. Right after these arguments were made in the Supreme Court, Karine Jean-Pierre was asked a very simple question. Have you stopped communicating, coercing, pressuring social media companies?
Does the administration still have close contact with social media companies? And in specific, are there still communications about removing misinformation?
Look, I'm going to be, I know there is currently SCOTUS, well, I don't even know if it's happening right now, but there's this particular Missouri case. I'm going to be super mindful, super careful, and not to answer a question that is, adjacent to what's happening with this particular case. I don't have any conversations to speak to or to lay out to you about conversations with social media. Obviously, the president tries to communicate with Americans and meet them where they are. You see us do that pretty consistently. I just want to be super mindful as there's an ongoing case happening at this time.
This has nothing to do with the ongoing case happening right now. It wouldn't affect that case, by the way. Please. Like the White House has ever shied away from expressing their opinion or talking about the facts at hand while something's being discussed at the Supreme Court. That was BS, what you just saw right now. It should be a very simple question to answer. Does the White House still maintain contacts at social media companies and still relay back and forth with them about the content on their platforms? It should be really simple to say, no, we don't. And since she didn't, the obvious answer is yes, they do. Now, yesterday, we broke apart the bloodbath lie that the media tried to push on the American people, that Donald Trump is calling for a bloodbath if he loses the election. Well, today we've got a brand new fake controversy. Donald Trump, on our pal Sebastian Gorka's radio show, also seen on the Salem News Channel, he said this, and if you watch mainstream media, this is all you would see about what Donald Trump said related to voters in America, Jewish voters in particular, supporting Democrats. This is what the mainstream media wanted you to see.
Each person that votes for Democrats hates their religion. They hate everything about Israel, and they should be ashamed of themselves because Israel will be destroyed. You have Iran now making a nuclear weapon. None of that would have happened with me. That's a big...
All right, so there it is. That's the headline. That's what you'll see all over the place. Donald Trump says that any Jewish person who votes for a Democrat hates their religion. And he did. He said that. Just like he said there'd be a bloodbath. He said that. But let's give you the full context. And let's give you everything that he said leading up to that moment so that you see what informed that opinion that President Trump expressed.
Could you explain why is it seemingly that this administration, including Chuck Schumer in the Senate, hate the man that Israel chose as their prime minister? Why do the Democrats hate Bibi Netanyahu?
I actually think they hate Israel.
Yes.
I don't think they hate him. I think they hate Israel. And the Democrat Party hates Israel. And the Democrat Party, if you remember when many Israeli representatives, including Netanyahu, when they came to the country begging, at that time President Obama, please don't make the Iran nuclear deal, which is a disaster and was a disaster. And I ended it. But unfortunately, they didn't do anything with the ending of it. I ended it and would have had a new deal made with Iran. It would have been good for everybody, and there would have been no nuclear weapons. You know, they're very close to getting a nuclear weapon right now.
Yes.
And once they have that, it becomes a different form of negotiation, a much more difficult negotiation. But I really believe they hate Israel. And they also see a lot of votes. Don't forget, when you see those Palestinian marches, even I'm amazed at how many people are in those marches. And guys like Schumer see that. And to him, it's votes. I think it's votes more than anything else, because he was always pro-Israel. He's very anti-Israel now. Any Jewish person that votes for Democrats hates their religion. They hate everything about Israel, and they should be ashamed of themselves, because Israel will be destroyed. You have Iran now making a nuclear weapon. None of that would have happened with me. That's a big thing. With me, Iran was broke. They were absolutely.
Yeah. So there now you have the full context of what he said. And laid after he made the case about the Iran nuclear deal and about how Joe Biden is now trying to disarm the Israelis as they fight after the October 7th attacks, the fact that Chuck Schumer says that Benjamin Netanyahu is the impediment to peace, that they're calling for a two-state solution, which would be a reward to the terrorists, that they consistently over the years continue to undermine the Israeli government and the Israeli people, for that matter, at a time when the Israeli people are incredibly solidified in their support of Netanyahu and his government. Well, it's kind of easy to reach that conclusion. It's like, what are these voters thinking? What are they doing? It's certainly against their best interests. And one is forced to remember when Joe Biden was running for president 4 years ago, and he went on the Breakfast Club, Charlemagne the God, and made his case to black voters.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community.
Now, you remember that. You're having trouble figuring out whether to vote for me or Trump. You ain't black. Ain't. Now, that's rude. That's odious. That's wrong. And you, like I, probably thought that was actually pretty despicable and racist at the time. But here's the funny thing. Mainstream media, people on the networks, New York Times, Washington, they didn't even mention this, let alone decry it and say that it was inappropriate, wrong, or racist. So what's Donald Trump supposed to think? Oh, these are the new rules? This is how we're supposed to operate? You vote for a guy who undermines your own community, in your opinion, then that makes you a betrayer of your community, and I can go ahead and say it. Okay, then I'll say it about Jews who vote for Democrats. Those are the rules, right, that the media has laid out for us at this point. By the way, just tangentially, we've actually found some self-hating black people who probably, in Joe Biden's opinion, aren't authentically black, because guess what they're going to do this November?
In 2008 and 2012, you voted for
Barack Obama.
2016,
I voted for Donald Trump.
Hillary Clinton. 2020,
Donald Trump.
Biden. And who will you vote for in 2024?
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. You may vote for the former president.
I may.
Why do you say that?
My views on certain things have changed. I am very much so riding the fence.
What are you struggling with?
Being in a pattern of doing the same thing that I've been doing, because it's kind of like second nature. Like when you go in a poll, you hit Democrat. Something has to happen. I mean, it's just so expensive to survive. And we're planning on having kids. I don't want to live in a stressful environment trying to rub two pennies together to try to make it either.
I regret to inform this lovely young couple that they are not, in fact, black. Joe Biden told me so. This is a silly game that is played, isn't it? But it's the game that accentuates the divisions in this country, that further divides. Listen, we are divided. This further divides and accentuates and exploits those divisions. I wish we didn't play this game, but it's the game we've been given. It's the rules of the game that we're living under. And of course, this morning, the Democrats, they jumped right in and they played along for their part. What was their reaction to Donald Trump saying that any Jew who votes Democrat hates their faith? Well, it's exactly what you'd expect.
Now is Haley Soifer. She's the Chief Executive Officer for the Jewish Democratic Council of America. Thank you so much for being with us. Donald Trump, who is not Jewish, is telling Jewish people how to be Jewish. What issue do you have with that?
Thanks, John. Well, what we heard yesterday from Donald Trump was entirely consistent with the message that he has sent to the vast majority of American Jews for years. In 2019, he said that any Jew who supports Democrats is either disloyal or uninformed. And he's conveying this message of contempt and anger toward Jewish Americans because he knows that 3/4 of us will never support him. So our message to Trump is, as he continues to demonstrate animus towards Jewish Americans, the feeling's mutual. It's only going to continue to grow as we head into November. And according to the latest poll by Pew, 79% of Jewish voters disapprove of Trump. It's among the highest disapproval of any religious group. So why is that? It's because he says he wants to be a dictator on day one.
Yeah, okay. You know, a good follow-up question here would have been, a la George Stephanopoulos, how do you square your support for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, considering they're supporting the very same people who just slaughtered 1,000 Jews at the music festival near Gaza and continue to try to undermine Israel's right to exist? Right? I mean, isn't that the real question? By the way, I do love the very concerned and furrowed brow. They're really good at the furrowed brows over at CNN, aren't they? Donald Trump, who is not Jewish, is telling Jewish Americans how to be Jewish. Last I checked, Joe Biden isn't black. And he told black people how to be black. This is where we are right now. And by the way, George Stephanopoulos isn't a woman and certainly isn't a rape victim as far as I know. But he's telling Nancy Mace and other rape victims how they're supposed to behave as rape victims. And it goes on and on and on. It's absolute silliness. And over at MSNBC, it was beyond hysterical. Donnie Deutsch filled the Jewish seat on the table this morning there.
I think out of all the things that Donald Trump has ever said that have offended my core, this is it. How dare you, Donald Trump, tell me what it takes to be a good Jew and not be a good Jew, and what it takes to love Israel and not love Israel. First of all, you stand for nothing what Judaism is all about being a decent human being, about being kind to others. You are the farthest thing from what anybody should say what a good Jew is or isn't. And make no mistake about it, for anybody who says, I'm voting for Donald Trump because he's automatically good for Israel, he would turn on Jews in a second. This is a guy who has a fondness for Hitler, according to his ex-chief of staff, John Kelly. This is a guy who said there's good people on both sides of Charlottesville. He would turn on Jews in a second if it was in his best interest. I know this could be very controversial. He doesn't care about Israel. He cares about Donald Trump. And how dare you tell me what it takes to be a good Jew?
Okay, yeah. So when you have to lie to make your point, like the good people on both sides lie in Charlottesville, you've lost the argument. And when you say he'll turn on Jews in an instant if it helps his political hide, you mean like Joe Biden is literally doing right now because he's worried about losing Michigan because of the pro-Hamas vote in Dearborn? So after years of giving lip service to Israel, he's now throwing them under the bus because of his own pathetic political hide? Is that what you mean, Donnie Deutsch? Yeah, this is the game we have to play, everybody. But how would Donald Trump ever reach the conclusion that Democrats don't support Israel? Well, maybe this might have something to do with it.
As a lifelong supporter of Israel, it has become clear to me the Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. The world has changed radically since then, and the Israeli people are being stifled right now by a governing vision that is stuck in the past.
That is Chuck Schumer standing on the floor of the Senate calling for regime change in Israel, not in the Palestinian Authority, where they've got a one-term president who's now celebrating his 20th year in office, not in the Gaza territories where Hamas is in charge. Yeah, the same Hamas terrorists that just slaughtered over 1,000 people. And by the way, why do I need to keep reminding everybody, are still at this moment holding Israeli and American hostages and sexually assaulting them. Why are we even having any of these discussions? while our people are still being held against their will. But he's not calling for regime change there. No, it's Benjamin Netanyahu who has to go. He claims that the Israeli people are being stifled by this government when their representatives in the Knesset just gave a vote of confidence 90-9 to support Benjamin Netanyahu's approach to this war. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's actually trying to meddle in the political affairs of another sovereign nation. So why would Donald Trump ever get the impression that Democrats don't have Israel's best interests at heart? Think about this for a minute. It's like a political party overseas within months of the September 11th attacks saying, you know, Osama bin Laden has a point and Al-Qaeda has a point. The U.S. should really leave all of their assets in the Middle East right now and never set foot on the sand of Saudi Arabia. Close down your bases here and in Kuwait and anywhere else you are. And by the way, the state of Israel should disband. That was another demand from Al-Qaeda, right? Al-Qaeda wanted Israel to be wiped off the face of the earth, and they wanted number two, Great Satan, to retreat. At least we don't have to disappear completely. We just have to leave the Middle East. Can you imagine a foreign leader like Chuck Schumer, the equivalent of Chuck Schumer, in a country that's supposed to be our ally, basically saying, you should do everything Al-Qaeda is asking for here. Let's move on from 9/11 because the world has changed. Because Chuck Schumer asking for Netanyahu to be replaced and a so-called two-state solution to be put in place literally rewards Hamas. Now that the October 7th massacre has happened, it's time to give Hamas exactly what they want. Although, to be fair, they don't really want a two-state solution, do they? No. They want the map to look like this. They want to erase Israel and replace it eventually permanently with the pretend made-up word Palestine. Now, in this case, they've just done it with a little Post-it note, but this is what Hamas has done. They put a Post-it note up there and oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. This image is not from Hamas. I got that wrong. I apologize. No, you know what this image is from? Do you know where this map exists? Do you know where the map of the world that has a Post-it covering up Israel and relabeling it as Palestine, do you know where that is? That hangs in the office wall of Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Dearborn, Michigan, a Democrat. That's what this image is from. That's where that map hangs. That's now who holds the power in the Democratic Party. Gosh, where would Donald Trump ever get the impression that Democrats don't have American Jews and the Israelis' interests at heart? I can't fathom it. So you saw who the morning network or cable news shows decided to put on to combat what Donald Trump said yesterday. You know who they didn't have on the air? Well, they didn't ask the opinion of this man, Benjamin Netanyahu.
I think what he said is totally inappropriate.
Sorry, he's not talking about Donald Trump, by the way. He's talking about Chuck Schumer.
I think what he said is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate for to go to a sister democracy and try to replace the elected leadership there. That's something that the Israeli public does on its own, and we're not a banana republic. I think the only government that we should be working on to bring down now is the terrorist tyranny in Gaza, the Hamas tyranny that murdered over 1,000 Israelis, including some dozens of Americans, and is holding Americans and Israelis hostage. That's what we should be focused on. And as far as what Senator Schumer said, the majority of Israelis support our governments. 82% of Americans support Israel instead of Hamas, but the majority of Israelis support the policies that we're leading.
That's right. And so it really does sort of, if I may say, beg the question. If 82% of Americans support Netanyahu and the state of Israel, and if the overwhelming majority of Israelis support Netanyahu and the state of Israel as they're conducting themselves after the terrorist attacks of October 7th, then why would Chuck Schumer do that? Why would Chuck Schumer say that? And it's because he and Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are now beholden to the same woman who put this map up on her wall. It's the only answer. It's the only solution. Where does Donald Trump get the notion that the Democratic Party doesn't have Jewish Americans' interests at heart? You know who else Morning Joe and CNN didn't have on the air to react to this? This guy. Talk radio host and television host Mark Levin. He's Jewish. You know, the only Jewish people they brought on were Donnie Deutsch and the woman who runs literally the Jewish Coalition for Democrats. Sebastian Gorka retweeted a message this morning that highlighted his interview that caused all this kerfuffle. He recorded this video from the basement of his secret lair, it appears, and said President Trump was right in his comments about Democrats and Israel. And Mark Levin reposted that and said, yep. Why isn't Mark Levin invited on Morning Joe to actually mix it up a little bit and say, here's why he's right and here's why you're wrong? Joe Scarborough isn't Jewish. The only Jewish person they can find is Donnie Deutsch to lend his opinion. Listen, I got to be honest with you. I'm not Jewish. I am actually a quarter Jewish by ethnicity, but I wasn't raised Jewish. I wasn't raised in the Jewish faith. I don't think it's up to me to determine what makes a good Jew or a bad Jew or how a Jew should behave or not, and whether that keeps them in consort or in right with their religion. Honestly, it isn't. To be fair, it's as much Donald Trump's right to say how a Jewish Democrat is in relationship with his faith or her faith as it is for Joe Biden to tell a black person whether they're authentically black or not. Neither of them should be doing that. But we're certainly not going to sit back and only give one of them a pass like the mainstream media has done. Listen, Joe Biden calls himself a Catholic, just like me. And he supports abortion on demand. He goes ahead and takes the Eucharist and participates in the Holy Eucharist on a regular basis, even though he is committing a mortal sin. I don't. And as a Catholic, I have every right to say something about it. If I know of another Catholic voter and they have the choice between an ardently pro-life, anti-abortion candidate and a pro-abortion candidate, and they choose the pro-abortion candidate, yes, I think I have the right to lend commentary to that person and whether their voting habits are in line with their faith. But ultimately, it's for each and every one of us to decide. I am not Jewish, but I certainly have a fealty to the people of Israel because they're on the right side of this issue. They're the victims of terrorism, and they're our only geopolitical ally in the area that we can count on. If we undermine Israel, like set aside the religion for a minute. If we undermine Israel in that region right now, and they are no longer a strong enemy of this nation, who exactly do we have to count on in a pretty critical part of the world? Who are we going to be able to work with? Who are we going to be able to cooperate with? Seriously. And to that end, here's Peter Doocy yesterday with our national security advisor. Set aside the religious faith. Set aside all of that aspect of it. Just in terms of pure geopolitical wisdom and diplomacy and the best national security interests of the United States of America, what the hell are we doing here with everything we're saying about our real ally over there? Watch how this exchange with Peter Doocy and Jake Sullivan went down.
Why did President Biden wait so long? Why did he let 32 days pass between phone calls with Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, so first of all, our teams are in contact every single day at every level. President Biden gets a daily, twice daily, sometimes 9 times daily update on what is going on. And he reserves his calls for the prime minister for when he believes there's a key strategic moment that needs to come forward. That's point one. Point two, prime minister, of course, knows how to reach President Biden. If the prime minister felt he needed the president for some reason, he would have picked up the phone and called. And of course, in the last 32 days, President Biden has never declined a phone call from Prime Minister Netanyahu. So this is pretty much the normal give and take of two leaders, both operating their governments, both operating their foreign policies, both working with their teams. And then at a key inflection point in the dialogue between the two sides coming together and talking. I wouldn't make more of it than that.
And there's a report that when President Biden was told his handling of the war between Israel and Hamas was starting to affect his poll numbers, the quote is, he began to shout and swear. So when he does that, is he shouting and swearing about Netanyahu or about Hamas or about his poll numbers?
This is the when did you stop beating your spouse question, because I don't think he ever did that. And so, well, you use that as the premise of your question, which is when he does that. I've never seen him do that, shout or swear in response to that. So from my perspective, that particular report is not correct.
Wow. The whole when did you stop beating your wife thing needs to be, shut away. It's a stupid remark to make. And certainly a little bit tone deaf in the context of this conversation. But that's Jake Sullivan basically saying that NBC News is a bunch of liars, which, I mean, we'd be inclined to agree with as well. But you see how he did that. The question was great. So there's reports that he starts shouting and swearing. Is it because of his poll numbers or what? And Jake Sullivan merely says, well, I've never seen it. Okay, well, have you heard other people talk about it, Jake? That's not a denial that it's ever happened, although since he's never seen it, he can't comment on it. Wow. Okay, good to know. He's really a valuable asset there for Team Biden. But of course, his job is not to answer questions or communicate anything. His job is to lie to you and continue the propaganda from the Biden administration. This is depressing stuff. It makes you feel like we're never going to be able to reach any kind of conclusion or any kind of resolution, or for that matter, ever kind of win against people who are undermining our values and our principles. But can I just tell you something? Once in a while, I see something, especially with stories like this that get so convoluted and they get so entrenched in what team you happen to be on and identity politics and all that stuff. I see something that breaks through, and it gives me hope. It tells me, you know what, maybe we are going to make it through this whole thing. Maybe there are enough of us who actually see through the bull, who actually are going to be able to just keep our heads down, focus on the facts, focus on the fight at hand, and end up on the other side of this whole thing, bruised, maybe even bloodied, maybe even a little broken, but still bonded together as not just Americans, but as the humanity that we are. Would you like to have a little bit of that hope too? All right. As usual, it comes in the form of a comedian, a British comedian who sort of sees through it all. Watch.
Did you see the other day, a couple of days ago, a man got arrested for carrying a sign that said Hamas are terrorists? Did you see that? Now, now he got arrested for that because that is just blatant disinformation, isn't it? That's Hamas are not. I know Hamas are not terrorists. I checked it on the BBC fact check site. So I know that they're definitely not. But of course, it's very difficult at the moment because we saw these protests. We're having them every weekend. It's really up my shopping, and there was that moment where Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is a group that is outlawed in most Arab countries, Hizb ut-Tahrir was standing there calling for jihad. Now, to be fair on the Met Police, they acted very swiftly, didn't they? They put a tweet out, didn't they? Put a tweet out. And it said, the word jihad has a number of meanings. And it does, we assume that jihad means holy war, but it's more of a kind of yoga retreat. It's more like, it's very peaceful. I went for a jihad at my local spa, and I had this thing called an intifada. It's it's a face wash. It's a kind of with tea tree and lavender oil, that kind of stuff. It's at the river to the sea beauty experience. You should try that.
See, we get it. We get it. We just got to stick together and laugh at them and mock them just like that. We know the truth. We know they're lying to us. And we just need to keep reminding ourselves, and we can be fine. And I'm thinking of doing the show with a glass of red wine from now on. I mean, after Easter. I've had to abstain from certain behaviors. But I might have to do that. That's a good vibe. I like that. Hey, thanks for watching today. And if you liked any part of this, please share it along all of your social media platforms while we still can. And we'll tune in next time. Thanks to the Electronic Payments Coalition, and thank you for watching and leaving comments. Take care. My name is Larry O'Connor. Please call me Larry.